the corporate ecosystem, it is often the loudest voice that commands the room, the most charismatic personality that captures the spotlight. But in the quiet stillness maintained by the overlooked, the observers in the corners, the most dangerous truths are patiently catalogued and filed away. They are not without a voice. They are merely waiting for the perfect moment, the moment when a single sentence can level an entire empire built on lies. That moment had arrived. The main boardroom at Innovatech Dynamics was a cathedral of modern capitalism, all glass and steel, and the thick scent of expensive cologne and self-congratulation. On the stage, under the warm glow of recessed lighting, stood Marcus Thorne, the division's charismatic executive director, and beside him, his golden-haired protege, Liam Carter. They were the architects of victory, basking in the success of Project Chimera, a revolutionary fintech platform that had poured hundreds of millions of dollars into the company's coffers. A wave of applause from shareholders and executives washed over them, a testament to their perceived genius. But then, a single voice, clear and steady, sliced through the receding tide of applause from the very back of the room. "I have a question." 100 heads, adorned with perfect haircuts and confident smiles, turned in unison. A ripple of confusion moved through the crowd as they focused on the source. There, standing near the heavy oak doors, was Alara Vance. To most in the room, she was a ghost, a name on a termination notice from months ago, a former data analyst dismissed for, as the rumors went, not being a team player. She wore a simple gray blazer that seemed a world away from the designer suits surrounding her. She did not belong here. On stage, Marcus Thorne's practiced smile tightened almost imperceptibly at the corners. He exchanged a brief, dismissive glance with Liam, whose own face held a flicker of something that might have been panic, quickly masked by annoyance. A few soft chuckles rippled through the audience, the absurdity of it, a disgraced employee trying to interrupt their celebration. "Miss Vance," Marcus began, his voice dripping with the false magnanimity of a king addressing a peasant. "This is quite the surprise. This is a private meeting for shareholders and current executives. Security?" But Alara did not flinch. She did not look at the two security guards, who had started to move tentatively toward her. Her gaze was level, locked on the men on the stage, a placid lake over a churning volcano of meticulously controlled fury. Her fingers were steady around the small, black USB drive in her hand. It was the culmination of sleepless nights, of tears shed in silence, of a promise she had made to herself in the darkness of her small apartment. "I won't waste your time," she said, her voice even, carrying across the now silent room with an authority that stunned them all. "I don't have a speech. I just need one slide. To understand the earthquake, one must first understand the calm, quiet landscape that it shattered." Before she was a ghost haunting a boardroom, Alara Vance was the silent, steady heartbeat of the 27th floor. Her world was not one of power lunches or strategic small talk. It was a sanctuary of logic, a quiet cathedral built from columns of data and stained glass windows of intricate spreadsheets. To others, it was a dizzying maze of numbers. To Alara, it was music. Each digit was a note, each algorithm a symphony, and within them, she could hear the pure, incorruptible melody of truth. In a world of smiling lies and carefully constructed narratives, numbers didn't have ulterior motives. They didn't betray, and they didn't forget. They simply were. And Alara was their most devoted interpreter. This devotion was not born of abstract passion alone. It was forged in the fires of necessity. Her life outside the gleaming towers of Innovatech Dynamics was a hushed counterpoint to its corporate clamor. It was the scent of antiseptic and lavender in her small, meticulously clean apartment, the soft hum of an oxygen machine, and the frail, gentle presence of her mother. Her mother, a woman who had once been a vibrant force of nature, was now confined to a world that had shrunk to the four walls of a sick room, her body waging a quiet, costly war against a relentless illness. Every dollar of Alara's respectable salary, every benefit from her corporate health insurance, was a bullet in that war. Her job wasn't just a career, it was a lifeline. It was the armor that protected the only person who mattered to her. This silent weight of responsibility was why she arrived earlier than everyone else and left later. her face illuminated by the glow of her monitors long after the city lights had begun to twinkle below. She wasn't chasing a promotion for the glory. She was chasing it for the security, for the simple, desperate peace of mind that comes with knowing you can afford the next prescription, the next treatment. In the often isolating landscape of the office, Alara had found an anchor in Liam Carter. He was the yin to her yang, the voice to her data. Where Alara was reserved and analytical, Liam was charming, ambitious, and socially adept. They had started in the same analyst pool years ago and had formed an immediate, unspoken bond. He was the one who could coax her away from her desk for lunch, where they would share cheap sandwiches at a small park, their dreams of the future sketched on condensation-covered water bottles. She would talk excitedly about a new data modeling technique, and he would translate it into a vision of how they could leverage it to climb the corporate ladder. "You're the genius, Alara," he'd often say, with an easy smile that made her believe it. "I'm just the hype man. We're a team." She trusted him implicitly. She shared her frustrations with him, her moments of doubt, and more importantly, her discoveries. When she found a particularly elegant solution to a complex problem, he was the first person she would show. His validation was the missing piece, the human element that made her sterile world of numbers feel warm and meaningful. Presiding over their small universe was Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a master of corporate gravity, a man whose charisma could bend light and warp the ambitions of those around him. He wasn't just a boss, he was a mentor, a visionary, a father figure who cultivated a fierce loyalty within his team. He remembered birthdays, asked about sick parents, and had a rare talent for making every employee feel like they were the key to the entire division's success. He would often stop by Alara's desk, leaning over her shoulder, not with the air of an inspector, but of a connoisseur, admiring a fine piece of art. "Incredible work, Vance," he'd murmur, his voice a low, confidential rumble. "The patterns you see, nobody else sees them." He praised her mind, her diligence, her integrity. He treated Alara and Liam as his star players, the future of his dynasty. In his office, surrounded by awards and photos of him with industry titans, he would paint a glorious picture of their trajectory. "You two are a perfect combination," he told them during one of their last meetings before the storm. "Alara, you have the mind, the engine that finds the gold. Liam, you have the voice, the polish to sell it. Stick with me, and there's no ceiling for either of you." He made them feel chosen. He made them feel like family. Alara, who had no family but her ailing mother, soaked it in. She worked even harder, driven by a powerful cocktail of financial desperation and a genuine desire to prove his faith in her was not misplaced. She believed in the meritocracy he preached. She believed that her hard work, her pure, unadulterated results, would be her shield and her chariot. This was the world before the storm, a delicate, stable ecosystem built on perceived trust and shared ambition. Alara felt safe within it. She had her work, a fortress of logic and truth. She had her mother, a reason for everything. She had Liam, a friend who understood her in a way few others did. And she had Marcus, a powerful mentor guiding her toward a future where the weight on her shoulders might finally feel a little lighter. She was quiet, yes, but she was seen. She was valued. She was, she believed, exactly where she was supposed to be, oblivious to the fact that in the world of men and money, the purest gold is often the easiest to melt down and recast in someone else's image. The foundations of her world were already hollow, eaten away by a greed she was too honest to comprehend, and she was about to take her first step onto the floor that would collapse beneath her. The birth of Project Chimera was not a quiet affair, it was a corporate coronation. Marcus Thorne had convened an all-hands meeting in the company's largest auditorium, a space usually reserved for shareholder events. The air crackled with the electricity of ambition and the promise of year-end bonuses that would be, in Marcus's own words, truly life-changing. On a massive screen behind him, the Chimera logo, a sleek, stylized lion's head with the horns of a ram, pulsed with a golden light. Marcus, pacing the stage with the easy confidence of a televangelist, spoke in the language of prophets and pioneers. He didn't talk about software. He talked about a new paradigm. He didn't mention algorithms. He spoke of a digital ecosystem that would anticipate the market's needs before the market itself knew them. It was, he declared, not just an investment platform, but a wealth creation engine, a digital messiah that would elevate Innovatech dynamics from a major player to a legend of the industry. The applause was thunderous. The team was swept up in the vision, their faces alight with a mixture of awe and avarice. Liam Carter, sitting next to Alara, was practically vibrating with excitement. "Can you believe this, Alara?" he whispered, his eyes fixed on Marcus. "We're a part of this. This is the big one. This is how we make our mark." Alara smiled, feeling the infectious energy of the room. She, too, felt a surge of pride. The underlying data architecture, the complex models that would power this engine, were partly her creation. She had spent months stress testing the framework, ensuring its stability and integrity. It was clean, powerful, and elegant. It was her work, and it was about to change the world. A few days later, Marcus called her into his glass-walled office. The triumphant energy of the launch still clung to him. "Alara," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "Chimera is live. The initial investor funds are flowing in, and the performance is already exceeding our most optimistic projections." He leaned forward, his expression becoming serious and confidential. "But I'm a cautious man. Before we scale this up, before we open the floodgates, I need one final, deep-level audit of the live data streams. Not just a systems check, but a granular transaction review. I need my best set of eyes on it." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I need your eyes on it. You see the things the rest of us miss. Consider it a final blessing, a seal of approval from our resident genius." Alara felt a flush of pride. This wasn't just a task. It was an honor. It was Marcus affirming his faith in her, giving her the final say on the integrity of the most important project in the company's history. She accepted with a solemn nod, her mind already buzzing with the methodologies she would use. For the first 2 weeks, her work was a joy. She delved into the live data, and everything looked perfect, even better than perfect. The system was performing flawlessly. The early returns for the seed investors were impressive, and the capital was flowing in a smooth, elegant dance, just as designed. She felt like a master watchmaker, admiring the intricate, perfect movements of her own creation. The first red flag was so small, so insignificant, that she almost dismissed it as a visual glitch. It was a single transaction payout to an early investor. The amount was $10,578.23, but the system had dispersed $10,600. A simple rounding up discrepancy of $21.77. In a system processing millions, it was less than a rounding error. It was dust. She made a note to flag it for the programming team, a minor bug to be patched in the next update. She thought nothing more of it. But a few days later, she saw it again. A different investor, a different amount, but the same curious pattern. A payout rounded up to the nearest 100. A coincidence. Then she saw a third, and a fourth. Coincidences, Alara knew, were often just patterns that hadn't been fully recognized. Her curiosity piqued. She isolated all outgoing payments to the initial investor pool. Her screen filled with data, and her stomach tightened. It wasn't random. Nearly every single payout, thousands of them, had been rounded up. The individual amounts were trivial, but when she ran a summation script, the total discrepancy was already over $50,000 in just a few weeks. It was a quiet, steady leak, a bleed. It was the first discordant note in her perfect symphony. She started pulling at the thread. If the payouts were being inflated, where was the money coming from? She cross-referenced the outflow with the operational expense logs. There, she found the opposite pattern. Vendor payments, server maintenance costs, software licensing fees, they were all being systematically, almost imperceptibly, rounded down to the nearest 10 or 50. It was brilliant in its subtlety. Anyone auditing a single transaction would see nothing amiss. But looking at the whole, it was a clear, deliberate siphoning of funds from the expense side to artificially inflate the returns on the investment side. The system wasn't just leaking. It was actively redistributing wealth in a way that was fundamentally dishonest. The clean, sterile world of her numbers began to feel contaminated. A cold knot of dread began to form in her gut. This was no bug. Bugs were chaotic, unpredictable. This was precise, methodical, and purposeful. It was a feature disguised as a flaw. Her investigation deepened, becoming an obsession. She worked late into the night, long after Liam and everyone else had gone home, the silence of the office amplifying the frantic clicking of her keyboard. She started mapping the flow of capital into the project, and that's when she found the second, far more alarming anomaly. According to the project blueprint, investor capital was to be held in a single, high-security repository before being allocated. But her mapping showed something different. A small but consistent percentage, around 3% of every large deposit, was being diverted. It was rerouted through a dizzying maze of third-party liquidity providers she had never heard of, entities based in countries with notoriously lax financial regulations. The money would vanish for a few hours, sometimes a full day, before reappearing in the central fund, minus a small service fee. The official system logs labeled these detours as algorithmic risk hedging, a plausible, if complex, explanation. But it was a lie. There was no hedging. It was a wash cycle, a sophisticated, automated method for skimming money, disguised under layers of impenetrable jargon. She sat back in her chair, the city lights a blur through the window behind her. The symphony was gone. All she could hear now was the ugly, grating sound of a machine designed to steal. Her sanctuary had been desecrated. This wasn't a flaw in the code or a few accounting errors. This was a conspiracy, written in the language she loved, embedded into the very heart of the project she had helped build. Project Chimera wasn't a wealth creation engine. It was a grand illusion, a magnificent lie, and she was the only one who had seen behind the curtain. The feeling was no longer just dread. It was a terrifying, isolating clarity. The system wasn't broken. It had been built to be broken from the very start. And the architects of that system were not distant, faceless criminals. They were the people she saw every single day. For 48 hours, Alara lived inside her discovery. The truth was a physical presence, a cold, heavy object she carried in her chest. It made it hard to breathe, hard to think about anything else. The clean, logical world she inhabited had been poisoned, and she was utterly alone with the antidote. Her first instinct, the one drilled into her by a lifetime of believing in systems and protocols, was to write a formal report and send it directly to Marcus. But she hesitated. The fraud was so audacious, so deeply woven into the fabric of the project, that it seemed impossible for it to exist without his knowledge. But what if he didn't know? What if he, too, was a victim of a brilliant, malicious design? Accusing him, even implicitly, would be professional suicide if she was wrong. The weight of the decision was crushing her. This was why she needed Liam. He was her sounding board, her partner. He knew the politics of the office, the personalities involved. He could see the angles she missed. She reasoned that a secret for one was a burden, but a secret for two was a strategy. She needed to share this radioactive truth before it consumed her. She caught him as he was packing up to leave, her heart pounding a nervous rhythm against her ribs. "Liam, can I talk to you? It's important, and it has to be private." He saw the gravity in her eyes, and his easygoing demeanor vanished, replaced by a focused concern. He nodded, and they found their way to a small, seldom-used conference room on a lower floor, a forgotten space with a faint smell of stale coffee. The city lights were just beginning to prick the deep blue of the evening sky as Alara opened her laptop. The screen cast a pale, anxious glow on their faces. "What's going on, Alara? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," she whispered, turning the screen toward him. "I think I've seen how the ghosts are made." For the next hour, she walked him through everything. She didn't just show him the data, she narrated the story it told. She showed him the quiet theft of the rounding errors, the brazen wash cycle of the offshore hedging accounts, the elegant, undeniable patterns that proved it was all deliberate. Her voice was low and steady, but fueled by the frantic energy of her conviction. She laid the entire conspiracy at his feet, her masterpiece of digital archaeology. As she spoke, Liam's face was a perfect mask of horrified concern. He leaned closer to the screen, his eyes wide. He asked all the right questions, his voice a shocked whisper. "Are you sure? There's no other explanation for this? A system flaw? A legacy code error?" Each time, she patiently showed him why his suggestion was impossible, how the patterns were too consistent, too intelligent, to be accidental. When she finished, a heavy silence filled the room. Liam leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "My God, Ilara," he breathed. This is dynamite. This could bring down the whole division. Marcus, he would be ruined." "I don't know if he's involved," Ilara said quickly. "That's the problem. We can't know." "You're right," he said, his eyes locking onto hers with a look of fierce solidarity. "We have to be smart about this. Incredibly smart. You were right to come to me. Don't say a word about this to anyone else, you hear me? Not a soul." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "We're a team. Remember? Let me think on this. Let me process it and figure out the safest way to bring this forward. We'll do it together." Ilara felt an immense wave of relief wash over her. The burden was no longer hers alone. She wasn't crazy. Her best friend believed her, and together, they would make it right. The next 2 days were strange. A fragile calm had settled over Ilara, but it was punctuated by a growing unease. Liam was distant. When she saw him in the hallway, he'd offer a quick, tight-lipped smile and hurry away, muttering about being late for a meeting. He stopped coming by her desk. Their usual lunch was canceled, him citing a client emergency. She told herself he was just being cautious, that he was deep in thought, formulating their plan. But she saw him once, in a glass-walled meeting room, deep in an animated conversation with Marcus. They were laughing. A cold, sharp icicle of doubt pierced through Ilara's relief. Why would he be laughing with the man at the center of a potential multi-million-dollar fraud? She pushed the thought away. He was playing the part, she told herself. He was being strategic. The betrayal did not arrive with a thunderclap, but with the quiet chime of an incoming email. It was a Thursday afternoon. Ilara had noticed a last-minute Project Chimera, senior strategic update meeting on Marcus's calendar. She hadn't thought much of it when she saw Liam was on the invite list, and she wasn't. He was the more client-facing one, after all. An hour after the meeting concluded, the email landed in every inbox in the division. The subject line was, "Celebrating proactive innovation and announcing a new leadership role." Her eyes scanned the text, but her brain refused to process the words. It was from Marcus. It began with effusive praise for the incredible success of Project Chimera. Then came the second paragraph. In the spirit of continuous improvement, it read, "I want to personally commend Liam Carter for his exceptional and proactive deep dive analysis into our fund flow architecture. Liam recently identified several key inefficiencies and redundancies in our processes. Working tirelessly, he has developed a series of optimizations that will not only increase investor returns, but also streamline our operational expenditures, saving the company millions. His ingenuity and commitment are an example to us all." Ilara read the paragraph again and again. The corporate doublespeak was a cruel, twisted mockery of her discovery. Inefficiencies, redundancies, optimizations. He had taken the evidence of a grand larceny she had handed him on a silver platter, polished off the fingerprints, and presented it as a cost-saving initiative. He hadn't exposed the crime. He had made himself a hero by making the crime more efficient. The final paragraph was the killing blow. To leverage his unique insights, Marcus had written, "I am thrilled to announce that Liam Carter is being promoted, effective immediately, to the newly created position of Senior Strategy Lead for Project Chimera. Please join me in congratulating him on this well-deserved achievement." The world seemed to shrink to the size of her monitor. The ambient noise of the office, the typing, the phones, the distant chatter, faded into a dull, roaring silence. He had stolen it all. Not just her data, not just her analysis, but the very truth itself. He had taken her life's best work and forged it into a key to his own success, locking her out in the process. A moment later, she saw him. He was walking back from Marcus's office, a triumphant smile on his face, surrounded by a small crowd of colleagues clapping him on the back, shaking his hand. His eyes, sweeping across the office, met hers for a fraction of a second. There was no apology in them, no guilt. There was only a cold, triumphant flicker of a stranger who had weighed their friendship against his ambition and found it wanting. The sound of her own world breaking was completely silent. The shock of betrayal did not curdle into anger, not at first. It was a cold, hollow space, a vacuum where the warmth of friendship and trust had once been. For a day, Alara moved through the office like a phantom, observing the new reality from a painful distance. She watched as Liam was moved into a larger cubicle, a corner spot with a better view. She listened to the peals of laughter from colleagues congratulating him. He was a hero. He had optimized. He had streamlined. He had taken her truth and made it profitable, and he was being rewarded for it. The numbness finally gave way to a desperate need for an explanation, for some acknowledgement of the profound theft that had taken place. She found him at the high-end coffee machine that was now on his side of the floor. He was holding a celebratory cupcake, laughing with another manager. She waited until the other person left, her presence a silent, unavoidable wait. Liam's smile faded when he saw her. He busied himself with adding a packet of sugar to his coffee. "Liam," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Why?" It was the only question that mattered. Liam didn't look at her. He stirred his coffee with a slow, deliberate motion. "Alara, you're being overly dramatic," he said, his tone casual, dismissive. It was the voice one uses for a child having a tantrum. "I took your concerns, found a practical, business-focused solution, and presented it. That's the job. You were seeing conspiracies in rounding errors. I saw an opportunity for efficiency." "An opportunity?" she repeated, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "You called it dynamite. You said it could bring Marcus down. You said we were a team." He finally looked at her, and his eyes were cold, devoid of the warmth she had known for years. "And I helped you," he said, his voice hardening. "I kept you from going in there and torching your career with a bunch of wild accusations. I framed it in a way that was productive. You should be thanking me." He took a bite of his cupcake. "Sometimes you get too lost in the numbers, Alara. You can't see the big picture. I can." With that, he turned and walked back to his new desk, leaving her standing alone, the wall between them now built not of silence, but of his smooth, unassailable lies. The next day, the second phase of the attack began. Her name appeared on a meeting invitation. The subject, performance and project realignment. The sender was Jessica Riley, a senior operations manager known throughout the company for two things: her impeccable, severe style of dress and her unflinching loyalty to Marcus Thorne. She was a corporate scalpel, used to excise problems with quiet, ruthless precision. Alara now knew she was the problem. Jessica's office was as sterile and intimidating as she was. She didn't offer Alara a seat. She remained standing behind her large, empty desk. "Alara," she began, her voice as crisp as a new banknote. "Given the recent strategic optimizations on Project Chimera, Marcus and I have decided to realign your duties. From now on, your primary focus will be on legacy system diagnostics. Furthermore, all of your work product, including daily progress reports, must be submitted to me for review before finalization." It was a demotion in all but name. She was being sent to the corporate graveyard, tasked with maintaining obsolete systems. The final sentence was the true masterstroke of the assault. "We need to ensure," Jessica added, her eyes like chips of ice, "that your analysis remains objective and aligned with the division's strategic goals." The micromanagement was immediate and suffocating. Jessica would question every line of code, every query Alara wrote. "Can you walk me through your methodology here? Why did you choose this variable?" The questions weren't for understanding. They were a form of psychological attrition, designed to make Alara doubt her own skills, the very skills that had once been lauded as genius. Her work, once her sanctuary, became a cage. The walls were not just bureaucratic, they were digital. A few days into her new role, she tried, out of habit, to run a diagnostic on the Chimera data stream. A small gray box popped up on her screen. Access denied. Your security credentials do not permit this action. She felt a jolt, as if from an electric shock. They had locked her out. They had taken away her eyes, severing her connection to the one place where the truth could still be found. Her access permissions, once among the highest in the division, were being systematically stripped away each day, the map of her digital world shrinking until all that was left was the small, irrelevant island of her new tasks. The isolation became social. Her colleagues, taking their cues from the new power dynamic, began to treat her like a pariah. Conversations would stop when she entered the break room. The friendly smiles she once received were replaced with averted eyes and hurried exits. Invitations to team lunches ceased. She was a ghost at her own desk, the whispers following her like a shadow. The narrative, carefully curated by Marcus and Liam, had taken hold. Ilara was difficult. Ilara was bitter about Liam's promotion. Ilara was not a team player. They were not just discrediting her work, they were discrediting her character. She started to question her own mind. Was Liam right? Had she been dramatic? Had she misinterpreted everything? The constant pressure, the isolation, the subtle critiques from Jessica, it was a campaign of gaslighting designed to erode her confidence and her sanity. Doubt is a slow poison, and she was being forced to drink it every single day. Her focus shattered. Her meticulous work became sloppy. She made small, careless mistakes, which Jessica, of course, dutifully logged and reported. They were creating the very reality they accused her of. She was becoming a poor performer, a problematic employee. In a final, desperate act of self-preservation, she caught Marcus as he was walking out of his office alone. "Marcus," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Please, just 5 minutes. What Liam presented is not the whole story. The data, it's not just inefficient, it's fraudulent. I can prove it if you just give me the access back." Marcus stopped. He turned to face her, but his expression wasn't angry. It was worse. It was one of deep, paternalistic pity. He placed a gentle hand on her arm, a gesture that felt more like a restraint than a comfort. "Ilara," he said, his voice soft and full of a terrible, feigned sympathy. "I'm worried about you. I know you're disappointed about Liam's promotion. You two were close. But you cannot let that personal feeling cloud your professional judgment." He looked at her, his eyes conveying a deep, sorrowful concern. "Liam has the project completely under control. He's thriving. What you need to do is focus on your own work. Let this go, for your own good." He didn't just dismiss her claim, he pathologized her integrity, twisting her pursuit of the truth into a symptom of petty jealousy. It was the most profound lie he had told yet, and it was devastatingly effective. She was left standing in the hallway, his poisoned sympathy still clinging to her skin. The last door had just been sealed. The walls had fully closed in, and the air was finally, completely, running out. The conversation with Marcus was not a closing door. It was a wall of mirrors, reflecting back a distorted, pathological version of herself. He had shown her that her pursuit of truth would always be reframed as jealousy, her integrity as instability. In that moment, standing in the hallway under his suffocating pity, Ilara knew that the conventional channels were compromised. The system wasn't just broken, it was an active participant in the lie. Yet, there was one last, desperate path she had not taken. It was a path born not of hope, but of a grim determination to not be erased without a fight. She would create a record. She would build an ark of evidence and send it sailing into the bureaucratic sea of the company, praying it might one day reach a shore where truth still mattered. That night, her apartment became a war room. Fueled by black coffee and a cold, simmering rage, she worked until the first pale light of dawn crept over the city. Since her access had been revoked, she could no longer pull the live data, but she had something almost as good: her memory and the scattered notes and preliminary analyses she had saved on her personal drive. With the precision of a cartographer, she reconstructed the maps of the fraudulent fund flows. She detailed the rounding error scheme, calculating the projected annual theft. She listed the suspicious third-party entities, cross-referencing their registration dates with the launch of Project Chimera. She wrote with a cold, clear, and dispassionate voice, stripping out all emotion and leaving only a skeleton of irrefutable logic. Her report was not an accusation. It was a diagnosis of a rot at the very heart of the division. It was 22 pages of pure, unassailable fact. It was the best work she had ever done. She addressed the email to the anonymous tip line for the corporate compliance department, and, as a failsafe, she CC'd the general inbox for human resources. She attached the report, her finger hovering over the send button for a long moment. This was the point of no return. She clicked it. A feeling of profound terror, mingled with an even more profound relief, washed over her. The truth was no longer hers alone to carry. The corporate machine, however, is not a seeker of truth, but a suppressor of disruption. What Alara didn't know was that her final, desperate move had been anticipated and neutralized weeks in advance. Marcus Thorne was not just a charismatic leader, he was a master strategist in the art of corporate warfare. The moment Alara had first questioned the Chimera data, he had recognized her not as an employee, but as a threat. He had immediately tasked Jessica Riley with building a file. It was a masterpiece of fabrication. Jessica's daily logs documented a pattern of uncooperative behavior and argumentative tendencies. She had submitted reports detailing Alara's missed deadlines on trivial tasks, conveniently omitting that the necessary data had been withheld from her. Marcus had then solicited anonymous feedback from team members, hand-picked loyalists who expressed concern over Alara's increasingly negative and paranoid attitude, which was, they claimed, creating a toxic work environment. 2 days before Alara sent her email, Marcus had gone to David Chen, the placid, non-confrontational head of HR, not with a problem, but with a solution. He framed his visit with a heavy heart, the concerned manager forced to deal with a troubled employee. He spoke of Alara's past brilliance, now sadly overshadowed by what he called an obsessive fixation on Liam Carter's success. He presented Jessica's file as a sad chronicle of a promising career in decline. He had already poisoned the well, filled it with a narrative so compelling and so thoroughly documented that by the time Alara's email arrived, it wasn't seen as a whistleblower report. It was seen as the desperate, retaliatory act of the very unstable employee Marcus had so compassionately described. Her meticulous evidence was now just another symptom of her obsession. The summons came on a Friday afternoon, an hour before the end of the workday. The email was from David Chen's assistant. The subject, meeting regarding your employment. The chill that went through Alara was absolute. The meeting was in a conference room on the executive floor, a place she had never been. Her walk there felt surreal. The familiar sounds of the office seemed distant and muted. She passed colleagues who either stared intently at their screens or offered tight, pitying smiles. She passed Liam's desk. He was on the phone, his back to her. The room was cold. Marcus was already there, seated beside David Chen. There was no one from compliance. David, a man with a soft face and eyes that perpetually avoided conflict, did not ask her to sit. He gestured vaguely to the chair opposite them and began to read from a document on the table in a flat monotone. Alara, we've called this meeting to discuss some serious concerns. We have received your recent report, he said, gesturing to a printed copy on the table as if it were contaminated. We have also received, over the past several weeks, numerous and consistent reports from your manager and your colleagues regarding a pattern of unprofessional conduct, insubordination, and a negative impact on team morale. Alara opened her mouth to speak, to ask about the data, the proof, but Marcus cut her off, his voice laced with that same, terrible, weaponized pity. Alara, this is what I was afraid of, he said, shaking his head slowly. This isn't about data, it's about your behavior. We tried to give you a chance to refocus, but instead, you've chosen to lash out with these wild, unfounded allegations against a highly successful project and a valued member of our team. They had turned her integrity into a character flaw. The HR manager, David, cleared his throat and continued reading from his script. In light of this pattern, and considering your report to be a clear act of retaliation against a colleague and your manager, the company has lost its confidence in your ability to perform your duties. Therefore, we are terminating your employment, effective immediately. The words hung in the sterile air. Terminating your employment. It was so simple, so clinical. A life's work, a lifeline for her mother, erased in a single, pre-written sentence. "My things," she finally managed to say, her voice hollow. "You will not be returning to your desk," David said, still not making eye contact. "Your personal effects will be cataloged, boxed up, and couriered to your home address. Your network access has already been revoked." As if on cue, the door opened and a uniformed security guard stepped inside. He did not look at her. He was just a function, a part of the process of her unpersoning. The walk from the conference room to the exit was the most humiliating journey of her life. The guard walked a few paces behind her. She was an inmate on her final walk. She passed the open plan office, a panorama of faces, some curious, some guilty, most just staring determinedly at their screens. She was a spectacle. As they passed Liam's desk, he finally looked up. Their eyes met for a second, and she saw a flicker of something pity perhaps, or a sliver of guilt, before he quickly looked away, his face hardening back into the mask of the ambitious stranger he had become. The guard did not lead her to the grand main lobby. He guided her down a quiet side corridor to a service elevator, and then through a stark concrete hallway to a steel side door. The afternoon sun was blinding as the door pushed open. She stepped out onto the pavement. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, the sound as final as a guillotine. Her keycard was useless. Her career was over. Her world was gone. She was on the outside, looking at a fortress of glass she could no longer enter, with nothing but the truth, a truth that no one would ever believe. The first week was a colorless fog. Alara's world, once defined by the rigid timetables and complex logic of corporate finance, had collapsed into the four walls of her apartment. Time became a thick, syrupy substance, stretching and pooling in meaningless ways. The silence was the loudest thing she had ever heard, a roaring vacuum where the familiar hum of servers and the low murmur of office chatter used to be. She'd wake up from nightmares of falling, her heart pounding with the phantom anxiety of a deadline that no longer existed. She didn't answer her phone. She couldn't bear the thought of trying to explain the unexplainable, of trying to voice the profound shame of her failure. The arrival of the cardboard box from Innovatech was a particularly cruel punctuation mark to her erasure. It sat by her door for a full day before she had the strength to open it. Inside, nestled in brown paper, were the trivial artifacts of her former life: a coffee mug with a chipped rim, a framed photo of her and her mother from a happier time, a stress ball shaped like a dollar sign, a handful of technical manuals. It was the sterile, impersonal collection of a life that had been professionally autopsied. They had boxed up her existence and shipped it back to her, postage paid. It was efficient. It was final. Reality began to bite in sharp, practical ways. The first of the month arrived without the familiar comfort of a direct deposit notification. An automated email from her bank warned of a low balance. Then came the medical bills, a cascade of white envelopes, each one a reminder of the ticking clock of her mother's illness and the health insurance she no longer had. The weight of it all was a physical pressure, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. The most difficult moments were the evenings she spent with her mother. She would put on a brave face, a brittle smile, and lie. She told her she was on a well-deserved sabbatical, that she was consulting from home on a new project. Her mother, frail but perceptive, would look at her with worried eyes, sensing the deep fracture beneath the surface of her daughter's cheerful facade. "You're working too hard, my dear," she'd say, patting her hand. The lie was a heavier burden than the truth. Her reason for fighting, the person she was trying to protect, was the one person she had to deceive, isolating her even further in her own private hell. Despair is a quiet, creeping thing, but anger is a fire. The spark came from the most mundane of sources, a late-night business news program she'd left on for background noise. Suddenly, Marcus Thorne's face filled the screen. He was being interviewed as an industry leader, talking about the stunning success of Project Chimera. He spoke with his signature charisma, his words dripping with corporate virtues. At Innovatec, he said, smiling into the camera, we believe integrity is our most valuable asset. It's the bedrock of everything we build. Something inside Elora snapped. The fog of her grief, the heavy blanket of her depression, was burned away in an instant by a white-hot surge of pure, clarifying rage. Integrity. He dared to say that word. He, a thief, hiding in a $1,000 suit. They hadn't just fired her. They hadn't just stolen her work. They had tried to steal her sanity, to rewrite her reality, and now they were broadcasting their lies to the world as virtues. They expected her to just disappear, to crumble under the weight of her disgrace. They thought they had won. In that moment, she decided despair was a luxury she could no longer afford. Grief was a prison. Anger, she realized, could be a key. The next morning, the apartment was no longer a sick room of sorrow. It was a command center. She cleared her small dining table, set up her personal laptop, and for the first time in weeks, felt the familiar spark of purpose. They had taken her access, her tools, and her title, but they hadn't taken her mind. She could no longer see inside their fortress, but she could survey its exterior, looking for the smallest crack. Her new investigation began. She became a digital ghost, haunting the public edges of their gilded world. She spent hours scouring SEC filings and public business registries, searching for the shell-like liquidity providers she remembered from her analysis. Most were dead ends, registered in countries with impenetrable privacy laws. But she found one, a domestic entity with a vague name, whose registration documents listed a board member with a familiar last name, a distant cousin of Jessica Riley. It was a thread, thin and fragile, but it was a start. She dived into the world of open-source intelligence. She created anonymous social media profiles to track the digital lives of Marcus, Liam, and their inner circle. She analyzed photos from corporate charity events, noting who was talking to whom, mapping their network of influence. She taught herself how to read the metadata of press releases and public documents, searching for digital fingerprints. Her work was slow, painstaking, and yielded only circumstantial evidence, but it kept the fire of her anger burning with a steady, controlled flame. Her keyboard was her only weapon, and her obsession was her shield. Weeks went by. She had built a mountain of circumstantial evidence, a compelling narrative of cronyism and probable fraud, but she had no smoking gun. She was hitting a wall of digital silence and corporate opacity. She needed an inside source, a human element, but she had been so thoroughly excommunicated that there was no one she could trust. Frustration began to set in. One night, staring at a complex network map she had drawn, a map of names and companies that led everywhere and nowhere, she leaned back, exhausted, and closed her eyes. And then, a memory surfaced, unbidden. It wasn't of a meeting or a data stream. It was a memory of the smell of floor polish and the quiet, rhythmic squeak of a janitor's cart. Arthur, the elderly, quiet man who cleaned the 27th floor. The memory crystallized. It was from a night about a year ago. She had been working past midnight, wrestling with a corrupted database. She had finally fixed it, a moment of small, private triumph. As she was packing up, Arthur had been there, quietly emptying the trash bins. He had paused and looked at her, his gaze gentle. "You work too hard, miss," he had said, his voice soft and gravelly. "But you love the puzzles, don't you? I see it. You like making the crooked lines straight." She had been so surprised that this man, this seemingly invisible fixture of the office, had seen her so clearly. They had spoken for a few minutes. It was nothing profound, just a quiet moment of human connection in a deserted office. She remembered helping him lift a heavy bag into his cart. He had thanked her with a nod and a rare, small smile. It was a ridiculous idea, a long shot. He was a janitor. He was probably retired by now. What could he possibly know? And yet, he was invisible. He was a part of the building's furniture, and people say and do things in front of furniture that they would never do in front of a person. He was there before everyone arrived and after everyone left. He saw the late-night meetings. He saw the expressions on people's faces when they thought no one was watching. He saw everything. In a world of loud, powerful liars, maybe the only person who held a piece of the truth was the quietest man in the building. A glimmer of hope, fragile but real, flickered to life in the darkness of her despair. She didn't know if she could find him or if he would even remember her. But for the first time since she had been escorted out of that building, she had a destination. She had a new thread to pull. The memory of Arthur was a fragile wisp of a lead, a lottery ticket purchased in desperation. Finding a retired janitor from a company of thousands, a man who had perfected the art of being invisible, felt like an impossible task. Ilara's first instinct, calling human resources, died before it was born. The last thing she wanted was to alert the very system that had crushed her. Her search began where all modern hunts for ghosts begin: online. She searched for Arthur and Innovatech, a fool's errand that yielded nothing. Then she remembered his last name, glimpsed once on his uniform's name tag: Pendleton. Arthur Pendleton. She typed it into public record databases. Dozens of results appeared across the country. It was a needle in a haystack of needles. She spent days cross-referencing, trying to narrow the search by age and location, hitting one dead end after another. He had almost no digital footprint, no social media, no professional profiles. He was a true ghost. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place, a cached version of an old internal company newsletter from a decade ago, celebrating employees with over 30 years of service. There he was, in a small, grainy photo. Arthur Pendleton, Facilities and Maintenance. And listed beneath his name was the union local he belonged to. It was a long shot, but it was a door. After a series of carefully worded, anonymous inquiries to the union's pension board, citing a desire to reconnect with an old colleague, she was given not a phone number, but a mailing address in a quiet, working-class suburb on the other side of the city. The drive there was a long conversation with her own doubt. The entire endeavor felt insane. She pictured herself on his doorstep, a disgraced ex-employee with wild conspiracy theories, pleading for help from a man who likely barely remembered her. He would probably think she was crazy, and he would probably be right. She was banking her entire future on a brief, kind conversation that had happened over a year ago. When she found the address, it was a small, immaculately kept house, a testament to a life of quiet order. She almost turned back, but the memory of Marcus Thorne's face on her television screen, talking about integrity, pushed her forward. She knocked, her knuckles rapping against the wood with a finality that terrified her. No one answered. Tucked into the mail slot, however, was a small, handwritten note for the mail carrier. It mentioned he would be at the Blackwood Diner until noon. Her heart leaped. It was a small, old-fashioned place a few blocks away. She found him in a booth in the back, nursing a cup of black coffee and reading a newspaper. He looked different out of his gray uniform, softer, just an ordinary grandfatherly man in a flannel shirt. He looked up as she approached, his eyes showing a flicker not of confusion, but of quiet recognition. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice the same soft gravel she remembered. "I had a feeling I might be seeing you." He gestured to the seat opposite him. "Please." The invitation, the lack of surprise, threw her off balance. But she slid into the booth, her hands trembling slightly as she pulled her laptop from her bag. There was no point in small talk. She laid the entire, shattered puzzle of her life on the Formica tabletop between them. For 20 minutes, she spoke, her voice low and urgent. She showed him the doctored returns, the flowcharts of the money laundering scheme, the names of the shell companies. She told him about Liam's betrayal, about Jessica's psychological warfare, about Marcus's poisoned pity, and the final, brutal efficiency of her own firing. She held nothing back. She was making a Hail Mary pass to the most unlikely person in the world, and she knew it. She finished, her voice ragged with emotion, and looked at him, her entire being braced for dismissal, for pity, for disbelief. "I know this sounds crazy," she finished, her voice barely a whisper, "but you were always there. You saw everything. I just thought, maybe you saw something. Anything that seemed wrong. Arthur did not speak for a long time. He simply looked at her, his gaze steady and thoughtful. He took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes never leaving hers. You make the crooked lines straight, he said finally, his voice soft. I remember saying that to you. You have a mind that seeks out the truth. He folded his newspaper and set it aside with a quiet finality. You are not crazy, Miss Vance. And you are not wrong. He leaned forward slightly, his expression shifting from one of gentle kindness to something far more serious, something with the weight of history behind it. They call me Arthur, and it is my name. But when I started Innovatech Dynamics in a garage 40 years ago with my late partner, my full name was Arthur Pendleton. The words landed with the impossible weight of a meteorite. Alara's mind struggled to connect the two images, the quiet, humble man in front of her and the almost mythical, reclusive founder of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, a man spoken of only in whispers and legends. She stared at him, a dozen questions warring with a profound, system-shocking disbelief. She must have looked utterly lost, because a small, sad smile touched his lips. It's a long story, he said. The short version is that I sold my partner my half of the voting shares when he fell ill, but I kept my majority equity. When he passed, the company fell to a new generation of leaders, men like Marcus Thorne. I saw the culture I had built, a culture of innovation and integrity, being replaced by a culture of greed and politics. The reports I received in the boardroom were fiction, polished and perfect. So, I retired. I vanished from public life, and I came back as a janitor. I wanted to see the truth of the house I had built, and I have, for the last 10 years. He looked at her, and now she saw it, the sharp, analytical intelligence behind the gentle facade. I've been watching Marcus for over a year. I knew there were financial irregularities, but he is clever, and he has hidden them well. I saw his ambition curdle into something dangerous. I saw him cultivate Liam Carter's greed. And most importantly, he said, his voice hardening with a cold anger, I saw what they did to you. I saw them isolate you, gaslight you, and throw you away. They weren't just covering up a crime, Miss Vance. They were trying to destroy a good person, an honest mind, because it was inconvenient to them. And that is something I will not tolerate. Hope, which had been a fragile flicker in the darkness, now roared to life like a furnace. The validation was so absolute, so profound, that it almost brought her to tears. She wasn't crazy, she was right. Arthur reached into his simple wallet and pulled out a plain black card, sliding it across the table. It had only a name and a phone number on it. This is my personal lawyer. He runs the trust that quietly holds my shares. He is a very good, very discreet man, and he has been waiting for this day. He looked at her, and he was no longer a janitor, and not quite the legendary founder. He was an ally, a partner. They took away your access, Miss Vance, he said, a new, powerful fire in his old eyes. I think it's time we got it back. All of it. They have kicked a hornet's nest they didn't know existed. He leaned back, a general ready to plan his campaign. So, tell me, where do we begin? The alliance with Arthur Pendleton changed everything. The lonely, desperate fight being waged from a small apartment was over. The war had just begun. The day after their meeting at the diner, Alara was given a key card to an anonymous office suite in a discreet building downtown. Her new command center was a world away from her former life. The cramped desk and single laptop were replaced by a bank of 6 monitors, a direct encrypted fiber line, and servers with processing power that made the Innovatech systems look antiquated. It was an arsenal. Arthur's personal cybersecurity team, a shadowy group of ethical hackers he referred to simply as the plumbers, had given her what she once thought was impossible, a ghost key, a master access credential that made her a god within Innovatech's digital infrastructure. She could walk through any firewall, open any encrypted file, and read every deleted email, all without leaving a single digital footprint. She was no longer a victim seeking validation. She was a hunter, unleashed. With Arthur's quiet funding and the legal oversight of his shrewd, hawk-eyed lawyer, Elias Vance, Alara began to work. Her days and nights blurred into a single, relentless pursuit of the complete, unvarnished truth. The first thing she did was confirm her initial findings. She watched in real time as the rounding errors and offshore skimming continued, but the scale of it was breathtaking. The $50,000 she had initially estimated was a pittance. The system was now siphoning off close to $1 million a week, a quiet, constant hemorrhage of investor capital. But this, she soon discovered, was merely the appetizer. The main course of the fraud was far more vast and insidious. Digging into the core programming of the Chimera platform, into the modules that governed investor payouts, she found the terrible truth. The project was generating no actual profit. None. The impressive returns being paid to the early investors, the returns that Marcus and Liam were celebrating in the press, were a complete fiction. With her new access, she could trace the flow of every dollar. She watched as the capital from a new, large-scale investor, a Midwestern teacher's pension fund, was deposited. Within hours, the system automatically carved off a piece of that principal investment and paid it out as monthly profits to the seed investors from 6 months prior. It was a classic Ponzi scheme, a house of cards built with the retirement funds of thousands of innocent people, all propped up by a constant, frantic need for new money. The deeper she dug, the more monstrous the crime became. She unearthed encrypted email chains between Marcus, Liam, and Jessica. They were arrogant, sloppy, convinced of their own untouchable genius. She read as Liam, her former best friend, joked about the gullible sheep lining up to invest. She saw Jessica meticulously planning the falsification of quarterly reports, and then she found their endgame. The emails spoke of a final harvest, a massive, last-ditch capital injection they were soliciting from a European investment consortium. Their plan was diabolical in its simplicity. Once that final, massive wire transfer cleared an amount close to $250 million, they would trigger what would appear to be a catastrophic system failure. A pre-planted malware, disguised as the work of foreign hackers, would wipe the servers, corrupt the data, and erase the transaction histories. In the ensuing chaos, as the company scrambled to deal with a massive cyber attack, the three of them would activate their prearranged golden parachutes, drain the offshore accounts, and disappear, leaving behind the smoking crater of a financial disaster and thousands of ruined lives. They weren't just robbing the house, they were planning to burn it to the ground with everyone inside. Alara worked with a cold, precise fury. She downloaded every incriminating email, every altered log file, every single line of fraudulent code, compiling a mountain of evidence so vast and absolute it could send the three of them to prison for the rest of their lives. Elias Vance, the lawyer, was ecstatic. "We have them," he said during one of their encrypted video calls. "Racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy. We can build a legal case that will put them away for 100 years. But Alara knew a quiet legal case, a process that would take years to unfold in sealed courtrooms, was not enough. It was not justice, it was merely punishment. Justice, she felt, required a reckoning. It required a public humiliation that matched the scale of their hubris. Their greatest weakness was their belief that their scheme was too complex, too brilliant for anyone to ever understand. She decided, then and there, to distill the entirety of their vast, intricate conspiracy into a form so simple, so brutally clear, that no one could ever misunderstand it. She would forge a weapon, not a 20-page report or a 1,000-page legal brief, a single slide. She spent the next 72 hours not on analysis, but on design. It was the most important work of her life. She treated the blank presentation slide like a canvas, and her data visualization tools like her brushes. Every element was chosen for maximum, devastating impact. On the far left, she placed the logos of the major investors, the teacher's pension fund, the consortium, the smaller family trusts. In the center, she put the sleek, golden logo of Project Chimera, a black box of deceit. Then, to the right, she charted the flow. A thick red line representing 80% of the capital was shown entering the box. Another looping, cannibalistic arrow showed this money being used to pay fake profits back to other investors. But the most important lines were the smaller ones. 3 distinct, color-coded lines, representing the remaining 20% of the capital, branched off from the main flow before it even entered the Chimera box. These lines snaked through a series of anonymous shell company icons. And at the end of each path, on the far right of the slide, was a clear, high-resolution corporate headshot. Marcus Thorne, Liam Carter, Jessica Riley. Beneath each picture was the name of an offshore bank, and the final, damning detail, the full, multi-digit account number where the stolen money had come to rest. It was a masterpiece of simplicity. It was the entire multi-million-dollar scam, the whole grand illusion, laid bare on a single screen. It needed no explanation. It offered no room for denial. It was a confession, rendered in graphics. She saved the final version, encrypted it, and loaded it onto one, single, unassuming black USB drive. She held it in her palm. It felt cold, dense, and impossibly heavy. It was the weight of her betrayal, her despair, her anger, and her vindication, all compressed into a few megabytes of data. Arthur came into the office as she was staring at the finished product on the main screen. He stood behind her for a long moment, taking it all in. The flowchart of a crime, the map of their downfall. He didn't say a word. He simply placed a steadying hand on her shoulder and gave a slow, grim nod. The weapon was forged. The plan was in place. Now, all they had to do was choose the time and place for the execution. The plan required a battlefield, a stage worthy of the reckoning to come. In the quiet, secure office that had become their headquarters, the debate was brief but crucial. Elias Vance, the lawyer, argued for the path of silent, overwhelming force. "We take this evidence directly to the SEC and the Department of Justice," he urged, his voice sharp and pragmatic. "We let them build an ironclad, confidential case. There will be dawn raids, frozen assets, indictments. It's clean, it's professional, and it's guaranteed." Arthur listened patiently, his hands steepled in front of him. When Elias was done, he shook his head slowly. "A quiet case allows the company to survive the scandal," he said, his voice low but firm. "It becomes a story of a few bad apples. The board will issue a press release, hire a new CEO, and the rot will remain. I did not build that company to be a place where this kind of evil can be quietly swept under the rug. This is a cancer, Elias. You don't treat it with a quiet surgery. You expose it to the light." It was Alara who gave voice to the final, necessary piece of the argument. "They tried to destroy me in public," she said, her voice steady, devoid of self-pity. "They built their careers on a public lie. The truth deserves the same audience." The decision was made. The venue would be the annual shareholder meeting, scheduled in 3 weeks at the city's largest convention center. It was the company's grandest stage, a celebration of its success. It was to be Marcus Thorne's victory lap and Liam Carter's coronation. It was, they all agreed, the perfect place to turn their throne into a scaffold. The morning of the meeting, Ilara stood before the mirror in her small apartment. There was no power suit, no dramatic transformation. She deliberately chose a simple, professional outfit, a gray blazer, a plain blouse. It was almost identical to what she had worn on the day she was fired. She was not returning as a conquering hero in disguise. She was returning as herself, the quiet analyst they had underestimated and discarded, now armed with a terrible and beautiful truth. On the table beside her lay the small, black USB drive. It seemed to pulse with a dense, contained energy. It was her pain, her anger, her intellect, her justice. She picked it up, its cool, smooth surface, a stark contrast to her racing heart. It was a concentrated point of gravity in her pocket, a key to a locked room in which 3 men's futures were about to end. Her phone buzzed. It was a simple text message from Arthur. "The stage is set. I will be the ghost in the wings." The plan was in motion. Arriving at the convention center was like stepping back into a world that had rejected her. The Innovatech Dynamics logo was everywhere, on massive banners and sleek digital displays. The air was thick with the confident chatter of investors and executives, men and women with easy smiles and expensive shoes. This was the world that had chewed her up and spat her out. For a moment, a wave of the old fear, the old shame, washed over her. She took a deep breath, her fingers closing around the USB drive in her pocket, and the fear receded, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. As planned, her name was not on any list. The moment she approached the registration desk, a polite but firm security guard stepped forward. "I'm sorry, ma'am, this is a private event." But just as he spoke, a quiet commotion began nearby. An elderly janitor pushing a large, rattling cleaning cart had accidentally tipped over a bin of recyclable bottles, sending them clattering across the polished marble floor. As the guards turned, annoyed by the distraction, the janitor Arthur looked at Alara, his eyes conveying a clear, urgent message. He nodded toward a nearby service corridor. While the staff was preoccupied with the mess, Alara slipped away, her heart pounding. Arthur met her in the quiet, concrete hallway. He didn't speak. He simply pressed a generic event staff badge into her hand and pointed her toward a door that led into the back of the main auditorium. She was a virus, quietly uploaded into the system. She found a seat in the last row, in the shadows, her presence completely unnoticed. The auditorium was vast, filled with 1,000 people. The lights dimmed, and a slick, corporate video began to play on the massive screens, filled with soaring music and abstract images of success. Then, Marcus Thorne walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. He was a master, a conductor of charisma. He spoke of growth, of vision, of a future brighter than ever before. Then, with a grand, paternal smile, he introduced the brilliant young mind who has been the engine of our success, the visionary behind Project Chimera, Liam Carter. Liam walked onto the stage, soaking in the applause. He looked confident, powerful, a man who believed he had earned his place in the Sunday. Watching them up there, bathed in the spotlight, Alara felt a strange sense of calm. The burning anger had cooled into something sharper, more focused. It was the detached precision of a surgeon, observing a disease she was about to remove. She watched them lie, watched them accept praise for a crime, watched them smile and preen, and she felt nothing but the slow, steady drumbeat of her own pulse, counting down the seconds. In her pocket, her hand was wrapped so tightly around the USB drive that her knuckles were white. Across the darkened auditorium, she scanned the perimeter, and there he was, Arthur. He was standing near a far exit, dressed in his janitor's uniform, leaning on a broom, utterly invisible to the powerful people in the room. He was a phantom, watching over his kingdom. The presentation reached its peak. The financial charts on the screen, all beautiful lies, showed a hockey stick trajectory of growth. The room was buzzing, the investors practically salivating. Marcus brought the presentation to a close. "And now," he said, his voice booming with false magnanimity, "we'd be happy to take a few of your questions." Microphones were set up in the aisles. A few hands went up. A man in the front row asked a softball question about dividend projections. Another asked about market expansion. Marcus and Liam answered with practiced ease. This was their moment. This was their triumph. Then, across the vast, dark space, Alara's eyes met Arthur's. He looked at her, his face calm, betraying nothing. He had been waiting for this moment for years, a king in exile. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was the signal. A spark igniting a fuse that had been carefully laid for months, a quiet command to unleash the storm. Alara took one deep, steadying breath. Then, she pushed her chair back, the sound unnaturally loud in the expectant hush of the room. She stood up, and in that one simple motion, in the silent, cavernous space of their greatest victory, the world of Marcus Thorne and Liam Carter began to fall. As Alara stood, a ripple of confusion spread from the back of the auditorium. Heads turned. Who was this woman? What was this interruption? On stage, Marcus Thorne squinted against the stage lights, his practiced smile faltering for a second as he recognized her. It was replaced by a look of utter, dismissive contempt. "Well, this is unexpected," he said into the microphone. his voice dripping with condescending amusement. "I believe we have a former employee who seems to have wandered into the wrong room. Security, could you please show Miss Vance the way out? We have important business to discuss." A few sycophants in the front rows chuckled, the sound echoing in the cavernous space. They were laughing. It was just as she had imagined. But the laughter died in their throats as Alara's clear, steady voice filled the room, carrying a weight that defied her simple appearance. "My name is Alara Vance," she said, her voice needing no microphone in the suddenly silent hall. "I was the lead data analyst for Project Chimera. I don't have a question. I have the answer." She began to walk. She moved down the long, carpeted aisle, not with haste, but with the slow, inexorable purpose of a tide turning. The two security guards who had started toward her hesitated, caught between their orders and the sheer, unnerving certainty of her advance. The entire audience was captivated, 1,000 people watching a single, quiet woman walk toward the stage. Each step was a hammer blow against the hollow foundation of the morning's celebration. She moved through their confused stares as if they were mist. She reached the short set of stairs to the stage and ascended. On stage, Liam looked as if he'd seen a ghost, his face pale and slack-jawed. Marcus's expression had hardened into a mask of cold fury. "This has gone far enough," he hissed, but his voice lacked its earlier booming confidence. Alara ignored him. She walked directly to the podium, to the laptop that was projecting their glorious, fraudulent charts onto the massive screens behind them. With a calm, deliberate motion, she reached down and disconnected their presentation device. Then, she took the small, black USB drive from her pocket and inserted it into the port. The screens went black. A collective gasp went through the auditorium. The tension was a living thing, 1,000 people holding their breath in the sudden, profound darkness. Her fingers found the trackpad. She made one simple click. The screens flickered to life, not with a chart or a logo, but with her slide. It was stark white, brutally simple, and illuminated the entire hall with its terrible clarity. For a long, silent moment, there was only confusion. The audience stared at the flowchart, trying to understand what it was. It looked like a corporate diagram, but it made no sense. They saw their own investment funds on one side, and on the other, the familiar, smiling faces of Marcus, Liam, and Jessica Riley, who was sitting, frozen, in the front row. Then, the understanding began to dawn. It started in the front rows, with the financial experts who could read a flowchart like a sentence. Their eyes traced the lines. They saw the percentages. They saw the names of the offshore banks. They saw the account numbers. The realization spread through the room like a contagion, a silent, horrified wave of comprehension. The quiet murmurs of confusion ceased. The coughing stopped. The rustling of papers went still. A profound, absolute silence descended upon the room. It was the sound of 1,000 realities shifting at once, the sound of a magnificent lie dying. On the stage, Marcus Thorne's charismatic mask did not just crack, it shattered. The blood drained from his face, leaving a waxy, sagging caricature of his former confidence. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He looked at the screen, at his own smiling face next to a Swiss bank account number, and for the first time in his life, he was speechless. Beside him, Liam Carter looked like he had been physically struck by an invisible force. He stumbled back a step, his hand flying to his chest, as if to stop his heart from beating. His eyes were wide with the pure, primal terror of a man watching his life end in real time. In the front row, Jessica's cold composure had broken into a million pieces, her face a knot of disbelief and pure, venomous hatred directed squarely at the quiet woman at the podium. The silence held for what felt like an eternity. 10 seconds, 20, 30. Then, it broke. It started not with a shout, but with a single, anguished cry from an elderly man in the third row. That's my pension fund." And the dam burst. The room erupted. The silence was replaced by a roar of outrage, a tidal wave of 1,000 betrayed voices. People were leaping to their feet, shouting, pointing at the stage. "Thieves," a woman screamed. "That's fraud. Those are offshore accounts." Another man yelled, his face purple with rage. "Call the police! Somebody call the police now!" The room, which moments before had been a temple of corporate adulation, had transformed into a lynch mob. Marcus, jolted back to life by the chaos, scrambled for the microphone. "This is a fabrication," he stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak against the roar of the crowd. A malicious, photoshopped lie from a disgraced, disgruntled employee. But no one was listening. His words were meaningless noise. The truth was glowing on the screens behind him, a silent, unblinking witness that vaporized his every denial. His power, his charisma, his entire empire of lies had been crumbled into pixels and righteous fury. Alara's work was done. She took one step back from the podium, her face impassive. She felt no triumph, no joy, only a grim, hollow sense of vindication. She watched the chaos she had unleashed, the inevitable consequence of a truth that had been suppressed for too long. The convention center's head of security was now on his radio, his face grim, realizing he was no longer managing a corporate event but a crime scene. He and his men began to move toward the stage, no longer to remove her, but to contain the two men who were now being openly called criminals by their own investors. She had not raised her voice. She had not uttered a single threat. She had simply shown them one slide. And the truth, in the end, was devouring them whole. The chaos that erupted in the auditorium was a physical force, a storm of shredded trust and explosive rage. The room was a shipwreck of a shareholder meeting. Investors were on their feet, shouting into their phones to their brokers, their lawyers, their spouses. "Sell everything," one man roared, his face a mask of fury. Board members, who moments before had been basking in the glow of success, were now pale and surrounded, trying in vain to calm the very people they had been complicit in deceiving. Through the pandemonium, two uniformed police officers, followed by a pair of grim-faced detectives in suits, made their way toward the stage. Elias Vance had made the call the second the slide went live. The authorities were not just a possibility, they were an inevitability. The perp walk was a slow, silent funeral for three careers. Marcus Thorne, his face a ghastly shade of white, attempted to bluster, shouting about slander and lawsuits, but his words were hollow, pathetic echoes in the roar of the crowd. Liam Carter was utterly broken, a vacant mannequin being led away, his eyes empty, the light of his ambition permanently extinguished. Jessica Riley was the only one who retained a shred of her former self. She walked with her head held high, her face a mask of cold, defiant fury, her eyes locking onto Alara one last time with a look of pure, undiluted hatred. And then they were gone, swallowed by the flashing lights and the closing doors, leaving a power vacuum and 1,000 unanswered questions in their wake. As the board members struggled to restore a semblance of order, a quiet, unassuming figure walked from the edge of the room toward the stage. It was Arthur. He calmly pushed his janitor's cart against a wall, methodically took off his gray work gloves, and placed them on the cart's handle. Then, he ascended the stairs to the podium. A confused silence began to fall over the room. Who was this old man? What was the janitor doing? Arthur tapped the microphone, the small sound echoing through the vast hall. "My name," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an undeniable authority that commanded attention, "is Arthur Pendleton." A wave of shock, the second of the day, rippled through the older members of the board and the long-time investors. The name was a legend, a ghost from the company's founding myth. Arthur let the name settle in the air before he continued. 40 years ago, I started this company with a simple principle, that integrity and innovation should walk hand in hand. I stepped away from the boardroom, but I never left my company. I stayed to watch, to listen. I have been watching the disease of greed, personified by Marcus Thorne, fester for years. He gestured to the glowing slide, still visible on the screens. What you see here is not an allegation. It is a fact, backed by terabytes of evidence, that is, as we speak, in the hands of the U.S. Attorney's Office. He then turned, his gaze sweeping over the crowd until it found Alara, who was standing quietly to the side. But the real story today is not about their corruption, he said, his voice ringing with a new strength. It is about the integrity of one person who refused to be silenced. He asked her to join him at the center of the stage. As she walked toward him, a new, different kind of applause began to build, tentative at first, then growing into a thunderous, rolling ovation of respect and gratitude. "Miss Vance," Arthur said, his voice now amplified for all to hear, "discovered this fraud months ago. For her honesty, she was betrayed by her friend, gaslit by her superiors, and fired in disgrace. They tried to break her spirit and erase her. They failed." He let the applause subside, then raised a hand. "The cancer within Innovatech will be cut out, but we must do more than that. We must ensure it can never grow again." His next words would reshape the future of the entire company. "Effective immediately, I am invoking my rights as majority shareholder to create a new, fully independent division, the Office of Corporate Integrity. This office will have the power to audit any department, review any project, and question any executive without restriction. It will be this company's immune system, and its findings will be reported directly and transparently to our shareholders." He paused, then looked directly at Alara. "And I can think of no one in the world more qualified to lead it. I am asking you, Miss Alara Vance, to accept the position as its first executive director." Alara looked out at the sea of faces, no longer a hostile crowd, but a hopeful one. She looked at Arthur, the king who had hidden himself as a janitor, who had given her back her voice. In the quiet that followed his announcement, she stepped to the microphone. "I accept," she said, her voice clear and strong. Weeks later, Alara stood in her new office. It was a corner suite, with a view that stretched to the horizon, the city a map of infinite possibilities. The chaos of that day had given way to a new, deliberate order. Marcus, Liam, and Jessica were facing a mountain of federal charges. Arthur, having reclaimed his place at the head of the board, was methodically rebuilding the company's culture around the principle of transparency. And Alara, in her new role, was creating the very systems that would have made their crimes impossible. She was no longer just making the crooked lines straight, she was redesigning the entire grid. The narrator's voice, calm and reflective, returned. They had laughed at her because she dared to speak up. They had built an empire on the assumption that she would remain silent. But they had made a fatal error in judgment, the same one that arrogant men have made for centuries. They mistook quietness for weakness. Her silence in the face of their betrayal had not been surrender. It was the sharpening of a sword. And her one, final word was not a plea, but a judgment. The story of Alara Vance is a testament to a simple, often forgotten truth of the corporate world. The most dangerous person in the room is not the one who shouts the loudest, but the one who has been paying the closest attention. Never, ever underestimate the quiet ones, for they are the ones who keep the records, who see the patterns, and who, when the time is right, know exactly where to place the single slide that can bring the whole rotten structure crashing down.